A politician that refuses to engage in contempt towards their opponent? Is it possible? Yes, it is. On the latest episode of the Live Faith First podcast, we continue with our LRK series, and I interview Anita Chen, who is running for District 17 in California. Now, she has some amazingly compassionate planks on her platform, which I know you're going to enjoy hearing about. And also, her character just won't let her engage in some of that contemptuous, polarizing conversation that we often see between opponents. It's actually quite refreshing. So enjoy today's episode of the Live Faith First podcast. Welcome to the Live Faith First podcast. I'm Elliot Sands, and I'm with Anita Chen. Now, Anita is running for the U.S. House of Representatives for District 17 in California. Anita, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited. Of course, you're from our neighborhood here in San Jose, and so this is really cool. And I'm really interested to hear a little bit about your campaign, kind of what your expectations are, but also you kind of bring a different perspective maybe to polarization. And so I'm really interested to kind of dig in on some of that with you today. But before we get to that, give us the cliff notes of your life. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Tell us a little bit about your upbringing. How'd you get where you are today?
Yeah, my parents are from Taiwan. I came here for higher education. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then when I was around 1, we moved to California, and I grew up here in San Jose. Same zip code since I was 1. And so I definitely call myself a Bay Area native. I was homeschooled growing up, and that allowed me to have a unique set of experiences. First, I experienced a set of educational setbacks when I was around 12 or so, in that I couldn't really articulate or write very well. And I remember at that moment feeling for the first time what it meant to be voiceless, to have thoughts and experiences and ideas, but not be able to communicate them in a way that was meaningful. I never forgot that feeling. After I was able to find a good tutor, being homeschooled also gave me the flexibility to start a company at 16, tutoring other students in English writing. That's since blossomed into a full-time job and business that I've been running for the last decade or so. And to stay close to my students, I did college online, got my MBA here at San Jose State, and I'm now in a PhD program at Liberty University for educational technology. So
Wow.
this new path in politics was really quite unexpected. But if I track it back to different parts of my story, I think it's this desire to give voice to the voiceless that has propelled me all these years.
Yeah, that's so cool. That is so cool. And they really, you took, experience that you have when you're 12 or 13 years old and kind of use that to propel yourself forward. And
Totally.
it is interesting that out of those challenges, those troubles, that there ends up being so much growth. So I love that. And I'm still blown away that at 16, you were starting your own business.
Yep.
Um,
I mean, it kind of happened organically. It was like my neighbor who had a young son, 8 years old, that wanted to learn English, and so I remember he was my first ants in the pants student, and I had come up with all these creative ways to capture his attention. So it grew from there.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. All right. Tell us a little bit about how you got to this place now where you're running for Congress. So you started the
Yeah.
business, a decade ago, and now here you are, making it through the primaries, which I don't know if that
Yes.
surprised you or you're like, yeah, I expected that, but here you are. You're going to be on the ballot in November. Tell us why you're running for Congress.
Yeah. I am aware that this is a non-traditional path, but that seems consistent with a lot of the other things that I've done in my life. I was approached by someone in my faith community who said, "Hey, would you be willing to consider a run for Congress?" And there's a role within the Republican Party that it's unfulfilled right now. Would you be open? And I thought, you got the wrong girl. I'm an English teacher. I'm not a politician. I pay attention to politics. I care about my community, but not like that. And so I prayed about it, felt peace to continue listening and just learning a little bit more. I attended a couple of meetings. And at that time, I was grappling with the research that I had found on child sex trafficking in the United States. It was far more prevalent than I ever had imagined. And for years, I had paid attention to and taken concern for the plight of women and children around the world and hoped one day that I could do something for them. But it was last summer where I found that these same sorts of stories, the cycles of exploitation, the vulnerability, were happening here in the United States. And because I live in the Bay Area, very much so in my backyard. And it occurred to me that the students and the children that I was reading about in these statistics were not that different than the students that were sitting in my classroom. And it was the combination of those two factors of there's a platform in which I can bring light to an issue, and the gravity of the issue that has for so long been ignored, that felt like it was right to bring the two sides together.
That's awesome. So now you're bringing together this idea of I'm going to go serve, hopefully in the nation's capital, but also do that with what I'm going to say with a purpose. So beyond just, going and doing some of the normal legislative stuff, would you talk a little bit about kind of what are the I'm going to call them the planks. What are the main planks of your platform? What are the things that you're most excited about were you to get to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. So the first one is called dignity restoration. And there's this idea behind it because we thought, okay, we care a lot about public safety. And it's so important for people to feel safe in their homes, in their workplaces, in their school and places of play even. And we also care a lot about educational freedom. But then it sounds really weird to be like anti-trafficking. Like, is there a way that we can put a positive language on it? And we came up with this language of dignity restoration. So those are the three primary planks: dignity restoration for trafficking survivors, public safety for our communities, and educational freedom for both students and parents. And as I've been speaking with constituents, they care also very much about border security and inflation as it affects quality of life, as well as cost of living in the Bay Area.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are all things so important. When, like you say, we're so concerned with our own personal safety. And sometimes I think maybe that overwhelms us. We're like, oh, this is the thing that I care about the most. What I really appreciate about what you're looking to do is you're looking outside of yourself, realizing that there's other people out there that are unsafe. And it's not just unsafe in their homes or unsafe, kind of their life is unsafe. And so how do we provide protections around people who really often are voiceless, like you've already kind of mentioned a little bit, that idea that they if you're caught up in the cycle of trafficking, if you're in that world, you don't have a voice. Your voice is somebody who's over you, and so
Yeah, I'd love to comment on that. I think our personal sense of safety is so important. Of course, physical safety, but also emotional safety and financial safety. And it's from that place of security that we can have the wherewithal and the energy, the compassion, the strength and credibility to reach out and support others. And so when we say that we feel unsafe in our communities, it's not just a lack of safety that hurts us personally, but it's also all the opportunities we're missing out on to help other people. So it cuts both ways, unfortunately.
yeah. And just to add on to that a little bit, that I really appreciate is that we've come to this place where loneliness is so prevalent in society, right? We saw that out of the um, coming out of Washington about a year and a half ago, just talking about the Surgeon General saying that we're having an epidemic of loneliness, and it's so important when we have this base of security, then we can build community. Then we can get outside of our homes and we can start to connect with one another again. And they found also that doing that around a cause brings people together across so many divides, right? Those things that we might normally everyday life bring it separate us. When we're all focused on something besides ourselves, a cause that we're all after, yeah, it does an amazing way of bringing community together. I
Totally.
want to ask you a question just about District 17.
Okay.
District 17 is one of the most ethnically and
Yeah.
socioeconomically diverse districts in the nation, right? You have Milpitas, you have Fremont, you have a lot of San Jose, and then you head on over to Cupertino. So there's this massive diversity. Um, how do you represent such a varied group of people? Like how when you picture yourself in Washington, what does that look like from the people living on, I'm going to generalize now, the east side of San Jose to the folks living in Cupertino to those living in Milpitas? How do you represent such a varied group of people?
Totally. I think when we talk about diversity, it's not just diversity of skin color or ethnic background or faiths. It's actually a diversity of stories and experiences. And so, my commitment is to listen to those stories and experiences. What are your concerns? What are your perspectives? What are your hopes for your community, for your family, and for yourself? And as I'm listening to these different stories, to bring a combination of that, almost like a choir, that it's not that everybody has to sing the same note, but there's a way in which when all of our voices can join together, it brings together this melodious, harmonious tone that we can bring to Washington. And I think overall, our community is very concerned about innovation. It's very concerned about the next generation, and it's very concerned about continuing to be a hub that brings value to ourselves, but also people all across the globe.
Yeah, that's good. Do you have forums where you sit down with people, or what's one of the
Yeah,
ways that you
we've tried
use just to
a
connect with
few
people in our
different
communities?
forums. Yes. Yeah, we've tried to do a few different forums, some online, some in person. And so it's in these spaces. Also, when I go to events, I try and ask insightful questions to hear what's on the minds of different voters and even young people. I was at a Boy Scouts meeting recently, and they asked me my thoughts on nuclear power. So it's cool to be able to have a place and an opportunity to step into people's lives and hear a sliver of their stories.
Yeah, that's great. That is great. Um, and it's cool that you have an opportunity to bring people together around just the conversation, right? It's
Yeah,
I love that. Now, part of all of this is just politics has always been polarizing. Like
yeah,
there's just this. We have one thing that we're trying to solve, but people have different opinions on how we're going to solve it, right? And so that's
yeah.
that's normal. That's humanity. That's life. That's just what we get all over the globe. Although it seems over the last few elections, we've taken the contempt and polarization to a whole new level.
Mhm.
I get my flyers in the mail around election season, and some of the things they're saying around the candidates. You're like, my goodness, this is wow. We've gone to a whole new
Yeah.
level here. Now, as a candidate running for Congress, how do you approach some of the character assassination or smear campaigns that seem to go along with two politicians running against one another?
Yeah. I'd love to just comment on that. I think in some ways, what we're experiencing feels very new. And I was complaining about that to a campaign member the other day. And he reminded me, like, if you look back to the founding fathers, these guys got into like fist fights with each other. They were like dueling for each other's honor. Okay. So thankfully, so far, I don't think we've gotten into any fist fights. And so if our nation was birthed from that sort of passionate, fiery expression, I think there's space to say, okay, is there a way in which we can have that sort of conversation in a productive and respectful manner where we can move the needle forward and make progress together? In regards to smear campaigns, another way to think about them are ad hominem attacks. I teach this to my students as a form of logical fallacies. So, an ad hominem attack is an attack on someone's personal character as opposed to their argument. And the problem with logical fallacies, though, is that they work. So, logical fallacies like fan wagoning or appealing to fear or appealing to authority, they actually work. And in our world that is so schizophrenic in its attention, that we go from one idea to the next ad to the next scene, sometimes it pays to make that type of headline. But I guess this would just be my appeal through my campaign to say that's not the approach that I'm going to take. I'm going to look at the facts, I'm going to argue the issues, and try to come to a resolution on those matters as opposed to attacking the person that's representing it primarily. And we've seen examples of how this can be successful. Speaker Johnson spoke of Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffrey in very positive manner, saying, "We haven't always seen eye to eye, but I know you're committed to the American people." We have Justice Antonin Scalia and Justice Ginsburg, who disagreed fiercely on the issues and wrote in fiery language against each other's arguments, but then would go out to lunch together. Or President Reagan, who was visited by his Russian contemporary at his funeral. Like, that's the sort of legacy that I would like to leave, to say there is a way in which we can argue the issues at the table, disagree fiercely, debate passionately, but go out and get lunch afterwards.
Yeah. I love that. And it's funny because kind of what you're describing, of course, is a throwback, right? Back to 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever that looked like there. On the other hand, like you said, those are some of the most political like upheaval in our society. I mean, just kind of, when you look at whether it was the Vietnam War and civil rights back in the 60s and 70s, and then 80s with Reagan and all of that brought. And what I do find interesting, like you say, that throwback idea, is that it wasn't that they didn't disagree. It wasn't that they all got along. It wasn't that they all didn't think, they all thought the same. Of course, they thought, polar opposites on a lot of things, but somehow the ability to overcome that divide is seems like an art that is lost. Now, I kind of want to throw back to you a little bit on this one, because it seems like there's that middle ground is not really there anymore. You kind of have these extreme on the Republican side or extreme on the Democratic side, but those moderates in the middle, like, they don't exist. There's not as many of them in politics any longer. Where would you look at yourself and say, I kind of see myself as a moderate, like that person who can kind of help bridge the gap? Is that where you would sit, or where? Maybe you can't point yourself exactly on the spectrum, but where would you put yourself?
I'm not sure that I would label myself as a moderate. I think my views on the spectrum of political ideology and thoughts is more conservative, but I do take a moderate approach in knowing that each person has worth and dignity and value, and I'm going to treat you as such. And so I think using that as the platform, the starting point, helps us to open up more conversations than might have been allowed to occur.
Yeah, that's great. Now, to kind of go back to your, I'm not going to use ad hominem arguments. We're going to try to work on the debates, right? Right? What feedback do you get from people, when you tell them this is your approach to smear campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I have had people just tell me to my face, like, you're not going to win. And that took me aback a little bit. But if I could go back to that lady, I would say, ma'am, I'd like to show that it's possible. And if you're willing, please join me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. It, I don't know if we've just gotten so accustomed to this is the way it has to be that we think that this is the only way to win. But I really hopeful there is another way that maybe we can turn a corner on some of this. Now, we've talked a little bit about, you mentioned, especially at the beginning when you started out to actually run for Congress, that your faith was part of that journey there. Would you tell a little bit about how does faith inform your politics, or how do politics inform your faith? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I try and do is apply some biblical principles and biblical lenses to my personal policy goals and priorities. So, for example, if you go on my website, we have what's known as the Burning Heart Doctrine, and it's just 5 different areas of broad scopes at which we look at the world and also politics and policies. So, one of those would be inherent dignity, to recognize that each person carries inherent dignity and worth within themselves. And that leads to personal responsibility. And that means that each of us is responsible for our actions, the way that it affects other people, and that we're free to do what we would like to do in the free society that we live in within bounds and rules, but we're not free from the consequences of those actions. And so I'd say those types of foundational principles are definitely informed by the word, but you don't have to be a Christian or even someone with faith to believe that each person carries inherent worth and dignity, or that they should be personally responsible, or that human flourishing is possible, and not only possible, but should be the goal for society more broadly. So I'd say that even though some of my thoughts are inspired by the word and based in the word, you don't have to be a Christian necessarily to walk towards those same goals.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Again, back to District 17, significant Hindu population,
Yeah.
significant Muslim population, significant just, agnostic or no belief at all, right? And so have you found that to be a challenge at all as you kind
Yeah,
of go
I
through
mean,
District
definitely.
17?
So, to what degree can I, keep stay true to myself, but also know that I'm representing these people, just as we mentioned, just so diverse with a variety of different life experiences. And so, my thought is that I first represent myself. That I am Anita Chen, and every day when I wake up in the morning, I am representing myself. And I have to be proud of who that is and be able to wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, go to sleep at night with how I showed up that day. So that's first. But beyond that, then I look at CD17 and say, okay, but what do these people desire and hope for, and how can I represent their stories? That's the job of a representative, is to represent them. So I have to be at peace with myself first, and then I can go out and represent CD17. And I don't find too many inconsistencies so far. Like, part of my faith is representing and respecting the different
Yeah.
walks of life, the different faiths, the different traditions that are out there, and to not force my beliefs on other people. That this is what I believe, and my faith tells me to be respectful of what you believe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I love that. Um, have you watched the Marvel movies? Are you
I have.
Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Is there? They're huge in our family. All right, so we are big MCU fans. Love all of them. I believe we've watched. All of. In fact, I was just telling somebody when the pandemic hit, COVID hit. Like, the first thing we did was do a marathon from, like, starting with Captain America, like, all the way through, timeline wise. And so we
Oh
of
my
course had
goodness.
time. We had
Isn't
time.
that like 30 hours or something?
It was, well, no, it was like 30 movies. So yeah, so
30.
no, it was, yeah. We when we busted that out somehow in like It was like 2 weeks, maybe. So
Wow.
we had to work a little bit, but
Yeah.
anyway, is there one character or movie in that universe that you would say describes you or your campaign? Like,
Yeah. I've always loved Captain America. Captain America First Avengers is one of my favorite movies because I'm a fan of historical dramas. But I love this one scene where Captain America at the beginning is this like skinny kid from Brooklyn and is always ready to stand up for himself and his friends. And he's dismissed from the army because he's too small. But you have Dr. Erskine, I believe, who's watching this kid and says, "That's the one." And it's not because he looks like he's ready for the job. And I think the colonel actually doubts him, like, really, this kid? But he says, yeah, no, he has the heart of a fighter. He tosses a grenade out. Everybody jumps back, including the big burly men doing jumping jacks, right? And it's just Captain America with his small, scrawny body, like hugging the grenade to say, like, everybody get back, get back. And it's in that moment that they know they are not creating someone that's not there. They're simply enhancing who he is really and truly. And so I hope that my campaign carries the spirit of Captain America.
yeah, awesome. I love it. I love it. Yes, those are great scenes. Like the whole start of that movie, that whole section there, was inspiring. Right? So good. I love
Yeah.
it. Um, Strong relationships are built on trust.
Mhm.
Tell us, what is it about you that people can or should trust? What does that look like for you, and as you would represent District 17?
Yeah. I've gotten some feedback of people saying, Ganita, you shouldn't talk about sex trafficking so much. You need to focus on hardcore issues like the economy and the border. I'd say both of these things are actually linked to trafficking because when you look at trafficking, it's those vulnerabilities of safety and finances that are often exploited. But my rebuttal would be to say the reason why I came to this campaign is to be a voice for the voiceless, to speak for the vulnerable among us, because as of right now, they can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
And you can have faith in knowing that if you ever become someone vulnerable or someone you love becomes vulnerable, maybe they've fallen on hard times, maybe they're wronged and that their rights are violated in some way, and the courts are not offering justice to them. You will know that because I've spoken for the vulnerable here, I will speak for the vulnerable again and again, because that is the driving force behind this campaign that started me here. There's been so many different sacrifices on a multitude of different fronts by many different people. But our purpose is to say we will raise a voice throughout this campaign for the most vulnerable. And you'll know that if that ever becomes you or someone that you love, you'll have a friend in us that will be willing to speak for you too.
yeah. That's great. I love it. Last question for you today. Um, Now this is a pretty exciting thing, you running for Congress. So this should be the answer, or maybe is the answer. But I
Yeah.
always end the podcast with what's exciting you right now. So maybe something outside of the campaign, if that's possible, because I'm sure it's taking up most of your life.
Yeah,
But
it is.
is there a person, an event? Is there something coming up that just like when you think about it, it makes you smile?
Yeah. I'll answer campaign first. I think there is a level of political engagement that I've never seen before. Among my students, even 5 years ago, I would ask them, hey, like when you look at your community, where are some things that you think can improve or should be changed? And usually the answer would be like, everything's fine, doesn't really matter, doesn't affect my life. But because they're seeing some of the brokenness in society become more and more apparent, even my students are mentioning things like we see unemployment, we see inflation, we see homelessness, we see crime, and we feel the effects of that on our daily lives. And sometimes we feel scared. when we go to school or when we go to the store. I'm also seeing similar levels of engagement among the Asian American community, where beforehand they would kind of focus on their lives. Everyone's busy. Like we talked about the sense of security, needing to feel safe before you can reach out. I think more and more Asian Americans are learning about their own political identity, their voice, their autonomy, and the places in which they can stand up, speak up, and make a difference. And so I think that level of political engagement is really exciting to me. And I would say connecting that type of excitement and direction and passion towards existing resources. If you look at my core campaign team, you'll see on the older end of the spectrum are white Americans who have all of their decades of experiences within the Republican Party and participating in politics, walking doors for President Reagan. They have incredible stories. And so when you take me and my passions and my desires and my learning and my hope to make a difference, and I've been able to connect that with the existing experience of people who have been doing this for decades. It's really a beautiful blend of different cultures and different life experiences, but walking towards the same goal together to make CD17 a more joyful, a more purposeful, and a more flourishing place for everyone. And so I hope that this campaign and beyond can see the fruits of that. That it's not just people who are excited on their own here wanting to get involved in politics and people over here who have decades of experience and don't have that connection. But there's this sense through this campaign that not only have we set the table for these sorts of conversation, but we've invited people to the table, and it's a space in which each side can be valued and dignified and honored, and their voice makes a difference.
Yeah, that's so good. I love it. I love it. Well, Anita, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your views on things. I appreciate your views on how we treat one another in the middle of kind of a polarizing season. I wish you all the best as
Thank
the
you.
election is just a few months away.
Yes.
We are recording this on July 2nd, so we're still waiting for 4th of July right now. But all the best on your campaign.
Thank you. Yes, you can check us out at www.anitaforcongress.us. Click around our website, make a donation if you can, tell your friends, and God bless you.
All right. All right, everybody, today, let's go live faith first.